Look, I was totally fine until, like I said, Craig pulled out the Brad Living believe in the group.
Like that.
And that set me off, bro.
All right, man. We're going to cover trade deadline review. We'll cover the week as well as what are the Flames' chances to make the playoffs. We're going to do a little bit of schedule strengthening comparison with the Blues, the Canucks, and the Utah Hockey Club. The Blues have a real easy schedule compared to the other three teams, but we'll get into it. Let's start things off with trade deadline review. We touched a bit about this on our on Afterburner the other night. As a whole, going into it, we've been talking about this all season long. Fan base is split. I don't know what the actual for real split is, but you got Team Tank. Everybody that sees the writing on the wall, you know, there's a real good argument in the fact that, sure, if we do somehow find a way to make it into the playoffs and end up playing Winnipeg in round one, how much value is that? I guess there's value for these young guys in getting playoff experience, but what are the chances you are going to win more than a game against Winnipeg? And it's one of those things where if the ultimate goal is to win the Stanley Cup, then what are we doing trying to just limp into the playoffs when your prospect pool is looking the way it is? You nailed last year's draft. If you really want to take this thing seriously and bring a cup home to Calgary, stay true to the rebuild. Keep building that prospect pool. Keep acquiring draft picks. Because in 3 to 5 years, with what you see coming up on the horizon and Dustin Wolf playing the way he is, our window for true cup contention is not now. Anyways, give us your breakdown on Connie's decision to stand pat. Some of the arguments of why we probably should have sold, especially given the seller's market that we saw just happen compared to last year's more of a buyer's market. And what would you have done? Give us a breakdown of the whole thing.
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say I'm not a huge fan of the standing pat. Listen, I get it. I understand. I get it. I've heard all the arguments. I've heard all the rationalizations. I understand. Because you hear every single gamut of rationalization. You can't sell because of this. You're in a playoff spot. What are you supposed to do? But like you said, I think the key word you hit on there was serious, right? Like, are we serious about building a Stanley Cup contender? Is that what we're really doing here?
And I think that should be the ultimate goal.
And I think that's ultimately where people get frustrated or see kind of, holes in this plan. Because I know Conroy, he explained it well, and he said they're still sticking to the plan. This isn't an indictment on Conroy as a general manager as a whole, because if you've been listening to the show, I think he's done a bang-up job the past season since Brad left a complete shit show behind.
Just an absolute tire fire.
Like, absolute shit show. Like, he freaking took a dump, took off, bye, see ya, and expected Conroy to clean it up, and he's done a pretty good job of doing that. However, I think most fans on Team Tank, which I would put myself on, if you've listened to the show, you know that. It's just you kind of get tired of the half measures, right? I think that's what we'd call it, not to go all Breaking Bad on everybody, but we've seen this team in the past 10, 20, 30, 35, going on 40 years, kind of take a lot of these half-measured approaches, right? It's like,
well, if you pull up that stat in the past 30 years, where do we average out? 17th overall?
Right in the middle, right? And a lot of people, there's kind of this, I've kind of talked about this before, people are like pointing out like, well, that's because they just go with the philosophy of like, we just want to sneak into the playoffs. Every year, that's kind of the philosophy. But, my sense of it, if you kind of look back on history, is just because the Flames have really never been willing to go one way or the other way, with any serious intent. It's kind of just been this kind of mushy, like, lack of vision, lack of planning, lack of execution, just this kind of like, well, you know what, like, we'll see, the chips will fall where they may. It's kind of just this path of least resistance that you've seen over the past however many years that's kind of led to us not ever really winning jack shit. I think when you see them be passive at a trade deadline and when it looked like they had an opportunity to maybe cash in on some assets, that's just what you think is like, hey, this is just another This is just another foray into the passivity of, well, let's just see what happens, and we don't want to make any big decisions right now. It's like, well, why not? Can't you just man up and make some decisions and like go for it one way or the other? So I get the
Well, and that's the thing
frustration.
is like the key word there is go for it.
Exactly. Well,
Like if you're gonna go for the Stanley Cup, you got to be
yeah,
realistic in where your window is. It's in the next 3 to 5 years, right? You got Perek is an absolute beast. You got
yeah,
some Battagulas looking good. Gridden's looking good. Like you got all these guys that are going to be NHL players in the coming seasons. And I mean, you brought this up in the last episode too. It's just like when you were first in the West, only behind a record-setting
yeah.
Tampa Bay Lightning team. What did you didn't even go for it then?
Didn't go for it. Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Is like that's why we're stuck in the middle right now. And not right now, but that's why we have been stuck in the middle because they're just unwilling to go to one extreme or the other, right? It's like, well, we don't have to rebuild. We can retool. We're not that bad. And that's what I'm saying with the rationalizations. Like you get this all the time. This is what we hear all the time. Like, right? You can't sell because, well, you're in a playoff spot. We're close to a playoff spot at the trade deadline. You're in one today after an amazing performance by Dustin Wolf on Saturday night. Another one just added to the list. But right, it's always been the case, right? It's like that's what you look back at those Daryl Sutter years when he was the GM. It was kind of like this post-lockout team building philosophy that was still in the mold of the pre-lockout. While other teams are aggressively rebuilding, they were just kind of doing this year to year. Well, we're really close, so let's just kind of like tinker around the edges year to year, and like it never led to anything. And then Tree Living came in, and it was kind of like, well, we can do a quick rebuild, right? It's only going to take like 2 years. We don't have to do. We're the team that will have to escape like the full on rebuild. We don't want to go full rebuild because we don't have to, right? We're not that bad. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when you are in a chance to like go all in, you don't go all in. And I'm just saying this because I wasn't expecting the Flames to do anything at the deadline. But then these trades started happening, right? And you're like, holy fucking shit. Brock Nelson's going for this. Like guys like Bolivier are going for this. Like, whoa, okay, there's some serious opportunity here. And and you're seeing the other thing that you just kind of like get jealous of is like these serious teams, these teams who don't take half measures, right? The big boy teams, the teams who are winning Stanley Cups, the teams who are going to Stanley Cup finals, the teams who are going on deep playoff runs almost every single year, the teams who are perennially excellent teams, like they're making these big time moves, right? And you're just kind of sitting there going like, why are the Flames always the team who are kind of like passive about everything?
Well, and also to add context to, like, if you are on team playoffs, and that's typically, where you sit, and I'm probably just like slap dead right in the middle because, I mean, I've talked about this lots on this show, is I can't sit here and watch a Flames game and not cheer when they're winning or losing. I mean, it's just like, it's in my DNA. It's hard for me. So if the playoffs is right there, I hope they make it. Not for the future, but for the, maybe I'm just please me now. And that's a bad thing. But, for context for people on team playoffs, if you're having a hard time understanding, it's just like, dude, 30 years of mid. I mean, outside of 04, like how many playoff rounds have you won?
2?
And so when it looks like finally this team is committed to a rebuild in what Connor did last year, and selling off all our pending UFAs and just bringing back haul after haul, and then you nail that draft, and now all of a sudden your future's looking bright. You can see why it's just like, man, we are close to getting into this full on rebuild, and maybe that's going to actually bring us more success than just mid. So you totally understand it from the team tank side of perspective.
Well, and even I think there's more to it because like, listen, like even if it's not even just like, okay, they're not tanking. That I think is the problem for me. It's that I know they're not tanking. So they're not committed to being a team who picks in the top 5 in the draft, right? So then the question becomes like, you're still going to need those foundational players. You need to acquire them somehow. Like, okay, you're not going to bottom out. Okay, well then you have to sell me on the plan to get those foundational players. Like how are you getting those guys? Because you don't have any you have Zane Parekh and you have Dustin Wolf essentially at this point, right? And I mean, Coronado looks like a good player. Zary looks like a good player. At this point, those guys aren't those foundational pieces that, come in and end up being like your Stamkos and Hedman, your Crosby and Malkin, your Taves and your Kane, your McKinnon and your Makar and Landeskog, your Ovechkin and Backstrom. Take your pick, your Barkov and Ekblad, right? Like you don't have those guys yet. So how are you going to get those guys? So that to me, when there has to be another strategy to get those players, and because like you said, last year was a buyer's market. We've got Chris Tanev, the best defensive defenseman in the entire world, probably the most impactful player for a playoff run, and we fucking got peanuts for the guy. Like nothing.
Couldn't even get you at first.
We got a second round pick and like a BC level prospect, which defensemen who are way, way, way less impactful than Chris Tanev were going for. That was the selling price for them at this deadline. So yeah, the market's the market. Okay, now it's a seller's market, right? Okay, well, yeah, if the market's the market, I understand, but you get frustrated, I think, because something we heard at the draft, right? Because again, going back to this question, how are you going to get these players? How are you going to get these foundational players? You're going to need to get them somehow if you're not getting them in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the draft. So, we heard at this year's draft that the Flames wanted to move up. If you're going to want to move up because you need a centerman, the prices were too high. We didn't have the assets to move up in the draft. So come this draft, if there's an opportunity to move up in the draft and you're like, man, I wish we had another first round pick in our pocket because like maybe we sold high on a guy like Blake Coleman. And I'm not saying these trades are more complicated than that for sure. But if you just committed to that and then we have that. Now we can move up in the draft to get that player who like could be a foundational piece, right? Or you can package, you can just build assets and package to like say like a Jack Eichel becomes available in the trade market. A Matthew Tkachuk type player becomes available in the trade market. 24-year-old superstar. Very rarely it happens, but when it does happen, you want to be ready to roll and be like, we can go get that player. And, I'm not a huge fan of that philosophy in general because I think we saw Brad Treliving kind of try to do that a little bit, early on in his rebuild, where he acquired a guy like Dougie Hamilton for a pretty hefty price, a first and 2 seconds, right in the middle of a rebuild. But if that's what you're trying to do, then you're going to need to accrue more assets somehow. And I think the other way you can do that is hitting on more picks like you did with Zane Parekh. It looks like an absolute steal at 9. Yep. You kind of did that last time, right? You got the second best player, arguably maybe the best player in the 2016 draft in Matthew Tkachuk. You got him at 6, right? So just another thing about accruing more assets and having more capital and having more draft picks because you have more
Dustin Wolf in the 7th round.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have 2 first-round picks instead of 1. Well, maybe we hit a guy late. Like if you want to follow that Dallas model, right? Like Wyatt Johnston's a later first-round pick. I think Jason Robertson's a second-round pick. You just want as many at-bats as possible in the draft. If you're not going to be picking in the top 5, you're going to have to rely on your scouting department heavily. So,
well, and also like you said, if you have extra picks, whether you're moving up in the draft, or is that the reason why Brad Treliving always fell and falls short is because he can't just, there's not enough in the cupboard just to put that one more little piece over the edge to get Eichel.
Exactly.
To get Stone. To get whoever else.
Exactly. And that's what the teams who are winning without really like doing the rebuild, that's the way they did it, right? Because you look at how Vegas, everybody points, well, Vegas never really right? They didn't really build through the draft. Well, are the Flames willing to go balls to the wall to get guys like Mark Stone and Jack Eichel and Alex Pietrangelo?
They're going to have to if we're doing a retool, like you said. You got to find other ways to find that.
Exactly. You're going to have to start making more full measure. You're going to have to take a full measured approach at some point. And I'm not saying go out and be crazy, but if they were just, when you've watched this team for so long and you wish they'd be more aggressive in a teardown and a rebuild and just accruing some assets, and an opportunity presents itself at a trade deadline when prices are freaking sky high, you're just sitting there going like, hey, I've seen this play out before. I'm kind of sick of being patient. I'm kind of sick of half measures. I wish they would just aggressively go out, have a plan, execute that plan, and move forward, because I think that's what's frustrating for most people kind of on the team tank side of things is this. They have this obsession, like I said, with like, well, we don't need to full tear it down. We don't need to do what other teams do and be really bad for 5 years. We can do it faster. We can do it better. And if they would just give up the we need to do this so fast, it would actually turn around faster. Like, you know what would turn around the franchise faster? Being shitty for 2 years and picking in the top 5 and like getting Gavin McKenna next year. That would turn the franchise around like that.
All right, man. Bet365, the world's largest sports betting platform. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Download the app today. Use code NATION when you sign up. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary with Bet365. The other pushback on that is this team is absolutely in a bottom 5 pick right now in the standings, maybe even bottom 3 without Dustin Wolf having an unbelievable season.
Yeah,
like there's no question.
No
if you don't have Dustin Wolf in net this season, you're picking top 3 this year.
Well,
so like that's the other thing too, is like as a general manager, you kind of always have to be, you're always on the fly.
Yeah.
I know you're in a reactive stance sometimes, you got to be in a proactive stance sometimes, but I mean, that is something that no one foresaw, especially at the time picking Dustin Wolf that late in the draft, basically last round, the Flames' last picks, one of the last picks of the draft. And now all of a sudden, and that's the other thing too, is we got to keep reminding everybody who's on this, we need elite talent train. Like, dude, we just fucking hit the jackpot in net with elite talent. This guy is carrying your team. He's the sole reason why you're in a playoff spot. If the Flames make the playoffs somehow miraculously, even though we'll get into some of the stats in a bit, being bottom dead last in a lot of offensive categories, bottom 10 in most, if not all, offensive categories, and your defense is not much better, it's like we have an absolute fucking stud in net. And I think that's one thing we got to keep reminding everybody, because well, everybody is, we need the next sell. We need that. We have one. He's here. Dustin Wolf is here. So I know that changes things a lot, because if you're Craig Conner or your management on this team, it's like now you have to, you can't not adjust to this. I think Dustin Wolf does give you the ability to speed things up a bit. So it changes the context and trajectory of how you manage this team.
Yeah, it definitely changes things. You just hope that they understand the change that needs to happen. It's not, like we're good to go here. Like we don't need to trade anybody. Like we have this stud. Like we're totally ready for the next. Because that's similar thing kind of happened. I don't even think similar. Almost the exact type thing happened last rebuild cycle, where Johnny Gaudreau showed up on the scene and hey, we all expected him to be a good player, but he came out and was like, holy shit, this guy's a franchise player. And it was kind of like,
and what are you going to do? You're going to get mad about that?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't get mad, but if you're just management, you have to understand what's happening here. Like there's still business to be done. I think
I still see people that are mad at Dustin Wolf. Even after the Habs game, there was one guy commenting that Dustin Wolf has destroyed this rebuild. And yes, you can look at it through that lens, because in essence it's true. But on the other hand, it's like, or is he just expediting what's most likely going to be a retool, as long as, like, to all your points, if Connie can somehow find other ways to accrue that talent, it's just like, how can you be mad about absolutely finding an absolute rock solid steal in the draft in Dustin Wolf? And that's the reason why we're in this predicament. So the Flames don't sell, which is what we just spent all the last discussion on. They also don't buy. So on the other flip side of the things,
that's a plus.
That's a plus. The decision to stand pat, at the end of the day, I don't necessarily hate it. I 100% agree with you on all your points of the reasons why it would have made sense to sell and continue to get better for the window in 3 to 5 years. It's one of those things, man. Like from day one, the GM, the coach, all the veterans in the group, they're like, no, we're breaking the playoffs. And now you have Dustin Wolf doing what he's doing, and you're right in the playoff picture. I just don't know, man. We're going to get into it in a bit, but the likelihood that these guys actually end up making the playoffs, It's pretty low.
Like you said, at least they didn't buy. I think that's if they had bought, I would have been, if they're sending out seconds and thirds and fourths for like a defenseman here, a shitty forward there, that would have really made me absolutely lose my mind. So that was a vote of confidence for sure that they didn't pull the old Bratch living move.
Well, and a couple of things that Craig said is, if he was looking to add anything, it would have had to be like the Philadelphia trade where it didn't just make sense for this season. It would have made sense for the following, 3 to 5 years. So it sounds like he's staying true to the vision.
Yep. He's sticking to his plan. I just wish his plan was a little more aggressive.
In terms of, gaining elite talent through the draft, 100%. But you know what? Like I said earlier, and you've mentioned this too this season, Craig Conroy did everything last year to suck this year.
That's what I keep reminding myself of.
And outside of goaltending, we do suck.
Yeah.
So
like his plan, like you cannot convince me otherwise. Look at the opening night roster. Look at the skill on this team. Look at where we rank in, like you said, every single offensive and defensive category. He wanted this team to suck. He put his thumb on the scale as hard as he possibly could. The team does suck, and nobody saw Dustin Wolf being this good this quickly. That's just the truth. So, as I can be as frustrated as I want with my thinking, they're not selling, not being aggressive enough. He absolutely, if you put Craig Conroy on a lie detector test, he absolutely thought they were picking top 5 this year. I don't think for me, there's no doubt in my mind.
At the end of the day, it's not Craig Conroy's fault. It is Dustin Wolf's fault.
So that's all I'm saying is, and again, I'm not complaining. I'm not one of these people who's blaming or complaining that they're necessarily in the spot they are in the standings. It's just you still have to be real with yourself and continue with the plan, which Craig is doing. Again, like I said, just maybe a little more aggressive be my preference. It's hard. It's hard because you swing back and forth, right? Because you're a Flames fan. You've been through all this emotion. You've seen this happen it's just 30 years of you just want things to be different, right? It's not complaint. It's not like negativity or
you want to win a Stanley Cup.
It's just like we want to win a fucking Stanley Cup. We haven't won shit here for years, and it's just you just want to win, and you just want to make sure that they don't fuck this up again for the 450th season in a row. That's all that you want if you're a Flames fan. And just most people are totally fucking sick of being mid. We're just sick of it. And we don't want to be mid. And, that's really it. We just want to win a Stanley. I don't even want to win a Stanley Cup, dude. How about two back-to-back years like in the playoffs where we're like in it? How about that? That'd be cool. That would be awesome.
When was the last time the Flames were in the playoffs in back-to-back seasons?
It's a technicality, really. Because it would be 2018, 2019, and then they made it in the play-in round in the bubble. So if the season had actually ended, they wouldn't have actually made the playoffs. So it's really a technicality. So if you want to go back to the actual year they did it, it would have been 07, 08, 08, 09.
That's a long time.
And they've never, since they won the Stanley Cup, won a playoff round in back-to-back years either, ever. So, that's right.
That's insane.
And I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
That's pain, dude. That's what that is.
That's all that it is. It's pain, right? So that's pain injected into you every single game when you get shit canned by Florida and shit canned by Carolina and beat by Dallas, and you're like, yeah, man, we should just trade everybody and pick in the draft. That's all that sounds familiar.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long-form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.